I really came to Islam after a long period of study and reflection. I went through my teenage years as an avid reader.
I basically decided that the religion was just something that adults had made up to make people obedient when I was in about grade 3.
I really came to Islam after a long period of study and reflection. I went through my teenage years as an avid reader, learning about different religions, different ways of life, and growing up as the child of Jamaican immigrants, I was very interested in Black consciousness. So of course, I began reading a lot about African history, about the Black consciousness movement in the US and the Caribbean. And I learned about Islam in this frame of reference. And I wasn't necessarily studying Islam with the intention of becoming a Muslim. I wanted to understand Islam enough so that I could have an intelligent conversation with other Muslims and understand a little bit more about my own history, my own memory. And among the interesting references to Islam that I discovered were those references to many of the Africans who were enslaved and brought to this part of the world, including Jamaica, were in fact from Muslim nations. The Fulani, the Hausa, the Mandinka people who brought Islam with them from Africa during the transatlantic slave trade. But due to the horrors of the slave trade, the memory of Islam faded, and in most cases, was lost. So, as a means of, reclaiming my identity, I felt that studying Islam, was a part of that. But what happened is it went beyond just mere study. I began to learn not only about the history of Islam and Muslim civilizations in Africa specifically, but I began to consider some of the, basic claims of the religion. And among the claims of the religion, that indeed, religion is one, God is one, and that all of the prophets, all of the messengers taught the same religion. That was a simple claim, but a very deep claim at the same time, that Islam is not named after a person, not named after a place, but rather it's named after a particular quality that the individual possesses in relationship to the one God. So long story short, I decided that I wanted to actually meet with an authority in the Muslim community. At that time I was living in Winnipeg, and I called up the Manitoba Islamic Association on Hazelwood Avenue in St. Vital in South Winnipeg. And I asked to speak with an Imam, and a very sweet lady from Trinidad and Tobago, from TNT, answered the phone. I knew she was from Trinidad because I know accents very well from the Caribbean. And she said, okay, please come to the mosque and you can meet the Imam. And I met the Imam a few days later, and we began talking and reasoning about Islam, and he was asking me a lot of personal questions about myself, my family, etc. And after our discussion, he just stopped and said, look, what exactly are you waiting for? What exactly are you waiting for? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it seems like you know a lot about Islam already. You've done your homework. You like to read, and what are you waiting for? And so I said, well, I'm not really sure. And then he said to me, repeat after me. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I bear witness that there's no God but God, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. And after I repeated it, he said, congratulations, welcome to Islam. And he gave me one of, he gave me one of these, these hugs, right? And he said, come with me. And he took me to a closet. It seemed as though the closet had not been opened in years. And he opened the closet and there were all these books. And he said, you like to read? And I said, yeah. So he gave me all of these books about how to make wudu, how to pray, how to do everything. And he said, I want you to, take some of these books home, read them. And I want you to come back to the mosque tomorrow and I will teach you how to read the Quran. And I left the mosque and I returned the next day learning alif, ba, ta, tha, and on. And that's basically how, that's the simple version of how I came to Islam.
MashaAllah. I mean, it's probably much more complicated in real life, but that sounds quite instantaneous. That's cool.
You didn't feel put upon when he did that, like imposed?
No, I felt, I felt somewhat shy to really resist. I'm not generally a shy person, but at that moment I felt shy to resist because he did ask me another question, which I'll mention now just to clarify that he said, you believe in one God, yes? I said, yes. And then he said to me, and I reflect on it, and I realized this man was very wise. He said to me, do you believe that Mohamed, on whom be peace, is who he said he was? And I said to him, I don't really have any reason not to believe it. And then he said, repeat after me. So in a way, I didn't really, I felt shy, yes. I didn't feel cornered. I felt as though, the question that he asked me was very clear and precise. And I think that, sometimes we, our nature is to be hesitant. And sometimes we need a very generous soul to encourage us. And I think the context was right. And after, I took my Shahada, I felt that it was right. And now, 25 years later, it is right.
Alhamdulillah.
So, my story is very different. I grew up in Australia as an Anglican, so Church of England. And we used to go, Sunday school and all that. And I basically decided that the religion was just something that adults had made up to make people obedient when I was in about grade 3, because my Sunday school teacher wasn't able to answer my questions about the Bible and Adam and Eve properly, and I thought she was just making up stories just to kind of placate me. So I decided that it was just something, done by the bearded old men. And although I kept believing as a Christian, I mean, you do, because that's the place you're in, right? So you go through confirmation and then went to a religious girls' school, private girls' school for high school, came to America on a Rotary Youth Exchange program. I was with practicing Lutherans in Washington State, USA. And I went to all the youth groups, and I used to get into a lot of debates. But it wasn't about the existence of God or Jesus. It wasn't anything profound. It was just debates. So then I went back to Australia and did my undergrad. During my undergrad, I became an atheist and a feminist, because you read Marxism and you decide that religion is the opium of the people. It's just something that the old white men had made up to placate people. That was something I already believed. So when you read that in the philosophy, it just kind of makes sense. And then you believe in evolution and you don't need God anyway because the world evolved, that whole story. So I came to Canada to do my master's degree. I went to Kingston, to Queens, 1991. And that was the time of the first Gulf War. And just before I left, there'd been all these demonstrations by angry Muslim men on TV with their Kalashnikovs and their Qurans and their beards and burning the US flag and Allahu Akbar. Like, they looked horrible, they looked violent, they looked like really like nasty people. So I had actually, I mean, it was all God's plan, but I had a teacher, a professor who was actually Pakistani. And I went to her and I said, can I have a look at your Quran? I'm kind of curious about this, book that they keep waving on TV. And I started reading it, and it was, like all these verses about God will throw brimstone and fire and destroy the unbelievers. And I was like, oh my God. No wonder these people are so violent. I didn't read much of it. I put it down, I came to Canada. And then I got involved with the International Student Centre. And they had all these, like political talks about the Gulf War. And I used to go, and I was really aggressive, like with the Muslims. And why I would go and like attack the women in hijab. Oh, you're oppressed. What are you doing at university? And they would say to me, oh, well, I'm here to do engineering, I'm here to do medicine. I'd be like, no, like, I don't mean what program you're studying. Like, why are you here? You're supposed to, your culture doesn't want you to be educated. So then they started teaching me about, that wasn't true, and, their families and their culture were very in favour of them getting an education. And during that whole process, I accidentally fell in love with and got married to a Muslim guy. And it wasn't planned at all. And I had to leave because my visa had expired. So he gave me a copy of the Quran to study on my way home. And then we were apart for about 8 months. So when I was in Kingston, I had met and been surrounded by all these people who believed, Christians and Muslims. And I was like after them all the time. Why do you believe in God? Why do you believe in God? I was like, I just didn't understand, like, why, like, engineers who are scientific and rational, why would you believe in God? So when I got home, I did all this reading in physics about the existence of God. And in physics, there's this whole genre of books they write for people who aren't physicists like me, right? Like, I'm not a physicist, but it's about, like, what they call the intelligent design. You probably have heard of these arguments. And theories of evolution. So basically, I started to read about the sort of like the rational reasons why intelligent design made sense. And I was really drawn to that. I was like, oh, this is like incredible. So in the meantime, I'm reading the Quran. I went back to the church. And when I was in church, that's when I started to notice the issues that Muslims had been criticizing Christianity about that I'd never really paid attention to before, like Jesus as part of the Trinity. Probably that was the only one, but I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Like, it hadn't been something that worried me before. You'll meet some converts who will say, I was always upset about that idea about Jesus as the Son of God, but it was nothing ever that had really bothered me. When I went back to the church, I was like, oh, yeah, that critique makes sense. And I had always felt that Christianity didn't recognise reason and rationality. So, but the Muslims were telling me about, the Muslim scientists, the Golden Age, how those stories in the Quran that talk about, like the seawater and all that sort of scientific stuff that didn't seem to contradict. And that was really compelling. That like really drew me in. So in the meantime, I had gotten married and come back to Canada to start my PhD. And in Australia, we had a big problem with the Muslim imams there because out of respect to my fiancé, I had wanted there to be an Islamic ceremony for the marriage. And after sitting with the head imam in Perth for an hour, and then at the end he said to me, so will you convert? And I'm like, I'm not going to convert. My husband got really mad with him. She doesn't have to convert to get married as long as she's, people of the book and blah, blah. Anyway, so they and I was just sitting there like watching these two guys fight. Then they had a council, the Council of Imams, who had basically put out an order, you are not to marry these two. We went around to all the imams who are legally registered to be celebrants.
No way.
And there was one guy, I think it was Turkish, he was like really shy, like you could tell he wanted to, but they had like been forbidden, right? So I went to my supervisor who was Pakistani. She called her mum in Pakistan. what should they do? And the mum said, well, she doesn't need an imam. All she needs is someone to read Fatiha in front of 2 witnesses and agree on the mahar. So she brought, my Pakistani supervisor, she brought her 2 PhD students to be the witnesses. And God help us. I don't even know if they were like praying Muslims or not. But anyway, they came to the house and they read the Fatiha. They asked me about the mahar. And that was it. We were married Islamically. Anyway, I'm supposed to be making this short, aren't I? So we came back to Canada. I did my first year of my PhD, which was the history of political philosophy. So I was reading the Quran, I was back at church, I was studying Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Judaism, Western philosophy, and honestly, the only thing that kept making sense out of all of that was the Quran. And because of how it like clicked so well with the lay physics, the concept of intelligent design. And I was terrified. I didn't want to become Muslim. I didn't want to change. I thought I would lose my family, my friends, my culture. I wouldn't be able to get a supervisor. I wouldn't be able to get a job. And I didn't want to become an oppressed Muslim woman. So I resisted like for probably 6 or 7 months. And by the time I kind of figured out that I think I believe in this. And then somebody said to me, look, what are you going to do if you like die and you on the day of judgment you say to God, I believed but I didn't make that final step? What will happen to you? What are you going to say? And I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. So I better accept it and then I can go in and help the Muslim women get unoppressed from the inside. And we went down to Jami Mosque, which was well, you know where Jami Mosque is, down on, and I was ready to convert, and it was locked. It was July '94, and I was like, I'm ready, and it was locked. There was no one there, so we were out on the pavement. I'll never forget this, under the light, the street light, and my husband said to me, "You don't need an imam to convert. All you need to do is say this." So he said the Shahada with me. I repeated it, and I was kind of looking around like thunderclap, lightning, no, nothing. We went home on the subway. He showed me how to make wudu. We prayed. I remember going down and the hijab that I was wearing, it like fell down around me. Everything felt so weird. And I was just bawling my eyes out like, oh my God, what have I done? What have I done? What have I done? Then I basically, in my mind, I rehearsed, why have I done this? I have like, it's a very cool, very logical step. I did this and this and this and this and this and it makes sense. And here I am. So the next day there was a conference at Oisi. They don't have it anymore. It was an annual conference every year at Oisi, the Islamic Forum. And one of my husband's friends, he was of course very excited that I'd converted, went up and told them that there's a sister who wants to take her Shahada. So they called me up on stage and did the Shahada in front of everyone. And then it was like, then it kind of felt real, like everyone comes up and hugs you and someone gave me a prayer mat and a scarf. And it was like, then it was kind of like, you know.
A big deal.
Real.
Was there any imam there?
Well, the man in charge of the conference, I don't remember, I don't know if he's an imam.
I was just really hoping that one imam did you right.
Imam Faisal, is he still around? Someone?
No idea.
Anyway.
I'm just glad you meant one good imam. In this entire
Oh, you mean
process.
from the ones in Perth?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I enjoy actually, in particular, is the independence of it all. That you don't need confirmation from other people to believe in something if you believe.
It's very important, especially as a woman. Like afterwards, people ask you, "Oh, you converted so you could get married," or you know, like for your husband. It's like, no, I didn't.
Yeah, you do it for Allah.
He was, alhamdulillah, he didn't mind marrying me as a non-Muslim, and his family didn't mind. So I know for sure I did it for belief.
Yeah, that's all that matters, isn't it? Mm-hmm. That's really beautiful, mashallah. Both of your stories are very impactful.
And I think we have to recognize as well that everyone has their own unique story.
Yeah.
And even if someone did, on the surface, you know, through a potential spouse, came to Islam, so what?
That's true.
I mean,
there are some people who do it for marriage and then later on they...
Yes. I think we make so many assumptions about faith, but faith is between God and the heart of the one who possesses it. That's it. We have to recognize that, and everyone has their own unique story, and each heart, receives the sacred in a very special, unique way, just for them. So we have to be careful about that. If someone has repeated their Shahada, then we have to recognize that Shahada was gifted to them by God. It has nothing to do with us. It's between them and God. So we have to respect that.